Welcome to the deep dive. Wow, okay, so there's been a lot happening in the last day or so, especially centered around the White House. If you've been feeling like it's hard to keep track, well, you're definitely not alone. So what we're doing today is taking that huge stack of news updates, reports, mainly from sources like the Associated Press, Al Jazeera, The Guardian, giving you a shortcut. Basically, we want you to walk away feeling informed about what went down on a very, very busy Tuesday, July 8th, 2025.
Exactly. And what's really fascinating, I think, is how a lot of these things, which might seem separate at first glance, actually connect. You start to see this broader picture emerging, the administration's priorities right now, the whole global situation. It's all tied together. We'll be digging into key decisions, policy shifts, some major international relations stuff coming out of the White House, plus other big headlines, domestic and global.
Okay, and it feels like the obvious place to start today is, well, the really high-stakes diplomacy playing out. We're talking about President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu. The level of engagement there has been pretty intense. They had that dinner Monday night,
Right.
which is already significant. But then they added another meeting on Tuesday, and they even moved it earlier, didn't they, to 4:3 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, moved up from 6 p.m. So clearly, things are moving fast. And all this is happening, with those indirect ceasefire talks going on in Qatar in the background.
So these Gaza ceasefire talks, they seem critical. What's the latest there?
Well, there was a bit of initial optimism. The U.S. envoy, Steve Witkoff, actually reported some progress. Said 3 out of 4 main issues were resolved in those proximity talks in Doha.
3 out of 4. Okay, that does sound like movement.
It does suggest something's working, at least partially.
So what's the sticking point then? The one remaining issue?
It really boils down to the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, withdrawing from Gaza. Hamas is demanding a return to the lines that were in place before the March ceasefire broke down.
And Israel's not agreeing to that?
Not currently, no. That seems to be the major hurdle. But look, they did agree on some other important things. Humanitarian aid, for example.
Ah, right. How's that being handled?
It'll be the UN or other international groups, specifically not Israeli or Hamas-linked organizations. That's agreed. And another thing, the U.S. is committed to extending the ceasefire past 60 days if the negotiations are still going.
Okay, so some flexibility there from the U.S. side. But Netanyahu's public position, it still sounds incredibly firm, right?
Extremely firm. He's still saying Hamas has to surrender, disarm, leaders go into exile. He's also, completely ruling out a full Palestinian state and insists Israel needs to keep security control over Gaza.
And this links to that really controversial idea that came up about Palestinians relocating.
Yes, exactly. Netanyahu apparently suggested Palestinians could, quote, voluntarily migrate to neighboring countries for a better future, as he put it. His direct quote was something like, if people want to stay, they can stay, but if they want to leave, they should be able to leave. It shouldn't be a prison. It should be an open place and give people a free choice.
And President Trump has mentioned similar concepts before, hasn't he? Like turning Gaza into a Riviera or talking about cooperation from nearby countries.
He has, yeah. He's floated ideas along those lines.
Yeah.
But what's really important to grasp here is the reaction to Netanyahu's latest suggestion. Al Jazeera, for example, reports it's being widely condemned as ethnic cleansing.
Wow. Strong language.
Very strong. And legal experts are weighing in too. Ralph Wild, an expert in international law, stated really forcefully that forced transfer, whether inside or outside a territory, is illegal. He said it's potentially a crime against humanity and part of what he called an ongoing process aimed at destroying the Palestinian people, which, in his view, constitutes genocide.
That's incredibly serious.
It is. And even former Israeli diplomats, like Alon Pinkas, are calling it a recipe for catastrophe. So these aren't fringe opinions. These are the serious concerns being reported.
Shifting slightly, but still on the U.S.-Israel dynamic, Netanyahu said he and Trump see eye to eye on destroying Hamas.
Yes, and he also claimed coordination between the two countries is, quote, the best it has ever been.
And then there was that gesture, nominating Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize.
Right, which, as the reports noted, is an award Trump apparently covets. An interesting piece of political theater, perhaps.
And did this intense focus on Israel have any spillover effects, like on Syria?
It seems so. Trump mentioned lifting sanctions on Syria. He said it was at the request of Middle Eastern leaders, including Netanyahu. The thinking seems to be that Syria's new leadership might present an opportunity for, a different kind of relationship.
Okay. And one more thing on the international front, Trump's comments about Putin.
Yeah, he expressed frustration there. Said Moscow's war in Ukraine is killing a lot of people. Just a brief mention, but notable.
All right, let's pivot now from that intense international diplomacy back home, domestic policy. And a really big one seems to be the federal workforce.
Huge. The Supreme Court basically gave the green light for the administration's plan to significantly cut down the size of the federal government. They overturned those lower court freezes that had put the brakes on it.
So this is actually happening now. What are the implications?
Well, experts are definitely raising red flags. They're warning about losing vital government services, potentially hundreds of thousands of job losses. We don't have exact official numbers from the Department of Government Efficiency, which is running this, but reports suggest tens of thousands of workers are already out fired, took deferred resignation, or put on leave.
But there was an exception, right? The VA.
That's right, the Department of Veterans Affairs. They won't have to make those 80,000 cuts they were initially ordered to.
Why not?
Because they'd already cut about 30,000 staff. They did it through retirements, buyouts, hiring freezes. Kind of got ahead of the curve, you could say.
Interesting. Okay, shifting gears again, the economy. Yeah. Tariffs.
Yes, tariffs are back in a big way. The administration set a firm deadline, August 1st, 2025. New rates kick in then. Letters went out to 14 countries, and the message was clear. Negotiations can continue, but that deadline, it's fixed. No change.
And what are some of those rates? They sounded pretty high in the reports.
They are. Myanmar and Laos are facing the highest, 40%.
Yep.
Then you've got Cambodia, Thailand at 36, Bangladesh, Serbia at 35, Indonesia at 32,
Okay.
Bosnia and Herzegovina, South Africa at 30%, and then a group at 25%, Japan, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, South Korea, Tunisia.
And for Japan and South Korea, that 25% is the total rate.
Correct. That's their total. And it's not just countries.
Yeah.
Trump also signaled plans for specific commodities, a 50% tariff on copper, and for pharmaceuticals.
Oh, yeah. What about those?
A very, very high rate. He said something like 200%.
Wow. 200% on drugs. That's significant.
Why? It really is.
Yeah.
And this whole tariff push, it's not just about, trade deficits anymore. It feels like something bigger. Trump framed it as defending the U.S. dollar's dominance globally. He threatened to, quote, tariff and punish countries, specifically mentioning the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, if they challenge the dollar.
How seriously did he frame that challenge?
Very seriously.
Yeah.
He compared losing the dollar status to losing a war, a major world war. So it suggests this economic competition is entering a new phase where currency itself is a major battleground. Could reshape a lot of things beyond just trade.
Okay. Also on the domestic front, immigration and labor, specifically farm workers.
Yeah, there's a new work program being introduced. It allows foreign migrants to stay and work on farms. But they were very clear to state this is not amnesty.
So how does that fit with the broader immigration policy?
Well, Agriculture Secretary Brooke Rollins put it this way. Mass deportation continues, but in a strategic way. The idea seems to be deportations are ongoing, but they want to make sure farmers still have the labor they need. A balancing act, maybe.
Got it. And energy policy. We know Trump's stance on wind power.
Still very much anti-wind. He repeated his criticisms, calls it expensive, bad for scenery, inefficient because it's intermittent. Still very much favoring coal.
And are there actions backing that up?
Yes, new executive orders are coming out to strictly enforce the termination of those Biden-era tax credits for clean electricity, specifically targeting wind and solar investment and production credits.
Okay, let's talk about the cabinet meeting itself. It happened yesterday.
Yes, Tuesday. Ran about an hour and 45 minutes. A bit shorter than the last one. Reports described it as pretty much a made-for-TV kind of event, showcasing the president's agenda.
And what were some highlights from that? I know Attorney General Pam Bondi came up.
She did. Trump defended her pretty strongly. There's been scrutiny over the Jeffrey Epstein files. He pushed back against a reporter asking about it and clarified Bondi was talking about a general case file, not a specific client list. He also went after the Federal Reserve Chair, Jerome Powell, called him terrible, said he should resign immediately for not cutting interest rates faster or deeper.
Did he suggest taking action against Powell?
He mentioned being open to a congressional investigation into Powell, which, that's a direct challenge to the Fed's traditional independence.
Right. And wasn't there something unusual about furnishings?
Oh, yeah. That was definitely a detour. Trump started talking about White House decor, paint colors, gold accents. He even mentioned moving a grandfather clock over from the State Department.
Moving a clock from the State Department.
Apparently. He said, quote, if I see anything that I like, I'm allowed to take it. So that was a unique moment.
Definitely sounds unique. Any other takeaways from the cabinet meeting?
Vice President Vance made an interesting comment. Admitted he'd been skeptical about getting some legislation passed by July 4th, but then congratulated the staff on their success.
Okay.
And Trump also weighed in on the New York City mayoral race, claimed he's not getting involved, but then immediately criticized the Democratic nominee, Zohran Mamdani, called him a disaster, a communist.
Wait, he said he wasn't getting involved, then called him a communist?
Pretty much, yeah. And he even threatened a federal takeover of New York City if Mamdani were to win. So not involved, but with some pretty strong opinions and threats.
Okay, so that's a packed day just within the White House, and it's direct policy actions. Incredible range of topics.
Absolutely. From Gaza diplomacy to grandfather clocks.
Let's broaden out a bit now. Other major developments happening. The flooding in Texas sounds absolutely devastating.
It really does. The reports are horrific. Over 100 people confirmed dead, hundreds still missing. And the detail about children missing from that Camp Mystic summer camp, just heartbreaking.
And questions are starting to be asked, right? About warnings, the response.
Yes, definitely. Questions about whether official warnings were adequate or timely. And inevitably, people are asking if the recent job cuts at the National Weather Service, at FEMA, if those played any role.
How is the administration responding to that part?
Well, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem gave a very emotional description of the devastation. But she also praised what she called the streamlining of FEMA, which aligns with Trump's stated goal to eventually scrap the agency.
So, praising the streamlining even amidst this disaster.
That's how it was reported, yes. And President Trump is planning to visit the area on Friday.
Okay. Shifting to technology. This AI impersonation threat sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It really does. The State Department warning diplomats, beware of attempts to impersonate Secretary of State Rubio, other officials, using AI.
How are they doing it?
Texts, signal messages, even AI-generated voicemails that sound like the real person. Apparently, an imposter tried to contact foreign ministers, a U.S. senator, even a governor. It's a serious new kind of threat.
Scary stuff. What else is bubbling up in terms of social or economic trends?
Well, there's an interesting AP NORC poll about birth rates. Turns out most U.S. adults don't really share the administration's concern about falling birth rates.
Oh. What are they concerned about instead?
Their priorities are more focused on things like reducing child care costs, improving health care for pregnant women. So maybe a bit of a disconnect there between public focus and administration focus.
And Planned Parenthood funding came up again?
Yes, a federal judge stepped in, ordered the administration to keep sending Medicaid payments to Planned Parenthood. That's despite a provision in a bill signed recently that tried to stop those payments.
And the IRS and churches, that seemed noteworthy.
Very. The IRS stated in a court filing that, in their view, churches and religious groups should be allowed to endorse political candidates. They called it a private matter, like a family discussion.
That could have huge implications for elections and the separation of church and state.
Absolutely. It could really change the landscape.
And finally, the political world itself keeps shifting. Elon Musk.
Yeah, Trump took a shot at Musk's new political party, called it ridiculous, said Musk himself is off the rails.
This is after Musk left the administration and criticized the budget, right?
Exactly. Seems like that relationship is definitely soured, a public falling out between two very loud voices.
And looking maybe further ahead, Gavin Newsom.
California Governor Gavin Newsom, yeah. He's been touring Trump-heavy areas in South Carolina. Most observers see that as testing the waters, signaling a possible 2028 presidential bid, trying to, maybe broaden his appeal beyond this San Francisco liberal label.
So when you put it all together, this one day, Tuesday, July 8th, it really does show how all these different threads, global diplomacy, domestic rules, economic levers, social issues, future politics, how they're all being pulled and woven together by this administration.
Yeah, the scope is just immense. And you see how quickly things can change, how interconnected it all is.
Which leads to, I guess, a bigger question for you, the listener.
Right. As we watch all this unfold, how do these specific decisions can play? The tariffs, the workforce cuts, the diplomatic maneuvers, even the small stuff, how do they ripple outwards? How might they fundamentally change, daily life or America's place in the world down the line?
Yeah, think about that tension between these big top-down directives from Washington cutting jobs, setting tariffs, and the realities people face on the ground, like the response to the Texas floods or farmers needing labor. How does that push and pull reveal the real impact of policy? And maybe more importantly, how might future crises test these new approaches? Will they show strength or expose weaknesses? Something to think about.